can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Keith Burns of Lullwater. You can check him out at lullwaterco.com. Keith, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. Keith has a really interesting background, which we're going to get into. And, you know, they do a lot of acquisitions and specifically around services, healthcare services. It can, you know, he'll go into more detail on the range of types of businesses they're looking for. But I was looking at where some episodes that are in the healthcare space. I had Pete Cunningham, and he talks about the engine behind helping grow healthcare clinics from 9 to 60. And another one was Scott Becker. We talk about winning digitally, and he's a publisher of Becker's Hospital Review and Becker's Healthcare. It was a really cool episode. Also, Wes Michael of Rare Patient Voice, and he talked about improving healthcare through patient engagement. So check out those. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. We do this in two ways. One, we help companies launch or run a podcast. We're an easy button for a company to do that. We do the strategy, the accountability, and the full execution and production. You know, Keith, people are always like focused on the execution and production piece, but like really, it's about the strategy and accountability and just executing on that stuff. Number two, we're an easy button for our company's gifting, right? So we make gifting and staying top of mind to your clients, your partners, your prospects, and even your staff simple, seamless, and I like it to be affordable as well. That's always good. And so all you have to do is give us a list of your people you want to follow up with and keep in touch with. We do everything else. Okay. You know, we call ourselves kind of the magic elves that run in the background to make it look easy for the company so they can build amazing relationships and run their business. Right. So for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways on how I can give to my best relationships. I have personally found no better way over the past decade to, one, profile the people I admire and love on my podcast. Two, send them sweet treats that they can eat every few months for years. Okay, because I like getting that stuff. If you have questions, go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. I'm excited to introduce Keith Burns. Keith Burns is the co-chairman and CEO of Lullwater & Co. Lullwater & Co. is a private investment firm dedicated to building enduring businesses. He also serves as co-executive chairman and former president of One Physics. One Physics is the largest medical physics services provider in the U.S., where he led programmatic acquisition strategy, resulting in 15 add-ons, right? He's got a background in law and finance, including roles at Goldman Sachs and top law firms, and he also serves on multiple boards. So, Keith, thanks for joining me.
Jeremy, thank you for having me, man.
I am excited to chat, and I'm going to share my screen in a second and show people Lullwater, but just start off and talk about Lullwater and what you do.
Oh, Lullwater is an organization my business partner and I started to invest in really great businesses that we want to endure for the long time. Lullwater actually it's a park near Emory University where we went to college, and it was this really beautiful space, really peaceful, really calming, and is really a nod to that origin story, but also we want to be that peace and that calm for business owners that are looking to transition their businesses to us. And we think that, Michael and I have a really unique perspective, having been not only investors, but operators of an actual business for a decade, into what business owners are going through, what their concerns are when they are transitioning a business, and ultimately how to do that and be a good next steward of their business and give them a good outcome on the exit as well. So really excited about the opportunity. We're actively looking for business services businesses, primarily healthcare services, testing, inspection, and compliance-based businesses, and other business services businesses that sort of fit a recurring revenue model.
I want to get into humble beginnings at some point, okay? Because that's what kind of what shapes us. But I do want to talk about size and industry. Talk about size. Like, what are you looking for if someone's out there thinking, okay, we should put this in front of Keith and Michael?
Yep. So I would say our ideal size range is, and I'm doing this in terms of earnings, seller discretionary earnings, or EBITDA, whatever the word that you want to use. But our ideal sweet spot is about 2 million to 5 million. Um, in certain circumstances with really high growing businesses, we would be looking to start at 1 million or would be open to going that low. And then on the upper end, if it's a really great business, you know, 6 or 7 million in EBITDA, that is something that we could do as well. But I would say our sweet spot is that $2 to $5 million range of earnings. And the reason for that is, Michael and I, want to build these businesses for the long term. And in a lot of cases, that means getting them at the lower end and being able to build the right systems and processes, put the right people in place for long-term growth within in the confines of the culture that we think is appropriate for an enduring business. And so in a lot of cases, that means starting smaller than what a lot of people maybe that are lower middle market private equity funds that would start no lower than 5 and go up. We're willing to get our hands dirty a little bit, and we actually get energy from those early stages of professionalizing businesses. We think that's really where we have an advantage. We have a interest in that. We enjoy teaching and building and coaching people at that level. So it's a really nice spot for us that is slightly below where I would say most private equity firms would want to play. But those are still great businesses to build a platform from. And that was the size range of the first business, that became One Physics that we bought, was in that range as well. So we have directly applicable experience to that size of a business.
Yeah, and also I like the way you think. I mean, like you were saying, there is probably, from what you're saying, maybe more of a gap there. So there's opportunity, and also since you're willing to roll your sleeves up a little bit, there's a potential upside, right? Because you're adding your know-how and your knowledge, especially with what you did with One Physics, into this, injecting that into the business as well.
Yeah, I don't want to tell everybody, but that is the most inefficient, excuse me, part of the market. That $1 to $5 million range. It's sizable enough. You have product market fit that it's a real business that could be professionalized and often has some room to grow. But it's not a grown adult. It's very much in that adolescent phase, and it takes a lot of hand holding and a lot of guiding to get it to that next level. And I just think that is the part. One, there's a great value opportunity, but then there's also just a great alignment and fit with our skill sets and what we want to do every day. And there are a ton of buyers on the other end, whether it be strategics, private equity firms, or in a lot of cases, I think Michael and I see a space where we can keep these businesses indefinitely and really just continue to grow and have them impact the community and our employees and the customers, obviously.
I mean, Keith, not everyone wants to roll their sleeves up and do work, right? So I think of it kind of like kids, right? Do you want this teenager that's awkward and going to give you problems and you're gonna have to wait up from a night and have a curfew, or you want this adult that's like they're handling their business, so it's like it takes more work. And again, I'm generally speaking here in that awkward teenage phase, right?
Yeah, it's just what problems do you want to deal with? There are some people that like less ambiguity, and what I would argue is these larger firms, like what One Physics is now, is very different than what it was when it was KGHP when we bought it with 16 people. And there's a skill set in the type of person that should lead what One Physics is now. And we have a great CEO there, currently in place, versus what it was when Michael and I were rolling up our sleeves between the little house in Jarrettsville that was between the funeral store and the funeral home and the liquor store. So that was that took a very different skill set. You're not getting, usually you're not getting people from Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley to sort of go sit between those two things, but that's what we brought to the table. So it's just a very different skill set, and it's really choose your own adventure, but it's the adventure that we feel we can bring disproportionate value and energy to. And there are just a ton of businesses in that range. If you think of the silver tsunami and all these businesses that are going to be changing hands from the baby boomers, a lot of those
Silver
aren't.
tsunami. I like that.
Yeah, where they're not all going to their heirs. Those people don't want to run landscaping companies and funeral homes and HVAC businesses or, medical physics, firms. And so, having people that want to take those businesses and care about the legacy of those businesses, but want to professionalize them and accelerate growth, there's a real market there. I think the other thing I'd say, and I'm sure you're aware of this in the multiple businesses that you've had, the person you become by running these businesses is a part of it as well. And so I think what we love about Lullwater and the opportunity it gives us is, who we are right now is, the previous 40 some odd years of our lives and our professional careers, but there's still so much growth that happens when you're in a business every day and you're leading people and you're thinking through what are the new service lines we want to be in, where do we want to expand geographically? Do we want to buy another business? Do we want to invest in marketing, sales, people? And I just get up every day excited to just see, can I get a little bit better? And I think that's what really entrepreneurship is, and that's what I really get excited about.
I like how you put it. What problems do you want to deal with? That's a good question to kind of guide anyone wherever they're at. I love that. And I do want to fast forward through your life a little bit, but just to give people a sense, but start off with the humble beginnings.
Yep.
Okay. Because we're talking mobile truck selling fried chicken wings, groceries. Like, take me just fast forward through, okay, I did this, and then here's some of the paths I've took. Because again, you went to law school, you still actually do teaching, right?
hmm
So take me back to there and just fast forward me through all the interesting, windy road.
Yep. So I am
Fried chicken
generation
wings.
fried chicken wings. So Gen X, born in the very late 70s, and you can see in the background I have a picture of the skyline of Atlanta. So I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. Um, the youngest of three, single mother, and I'd say, while we may not have had a ton of money, we did have a lot of love, and I really credit my mother with a love of reading and a love of learning. And so there were always books in my house. And, my mom was a real estate agent and she had other jobs. But there were a lot of books on prosperity and abundance and just these books that really spoke to anything was possible. And I think early on, that was the biggest thing that she imparted to me, that anything was possible. And there's a story that she likes to tell where we were at church. So my mom's an ordained minister, and she's been a minister for most of my life, 30 plus years. And we're in church. I'm probably 5, 6, maybe 7. And there's a quadriplegic there who was speaking and was detailing how they became a quadriplegic, but ultimately built a very successful business. And the conversation was around this idea of prosperity and the ability to build a business. And, I'm 6, 7. My mom says I take her hand and I walk away and I say, Mom, I'm going to be worth $25 million someday and I'm going to take care of you. Now, I don't know if she remembers that because of the check I essentially wrote at that 6-year-old point.
That's a
But
pretty
there's
specific number.
It was, right? And I don't know if he said 25 million or he said 10 and I said 25 because I was trying to be better. Um, but it was this idea that it was possible, right? And I think if you looked at, none I was the first person in my family to go to college at Emory University. That's where I met Michael, my business partner. I was the first person in my family, obviously, to go to graduate school. I became a lawyer. I worked at, two top 20 law firms. I worked at arguably, one of the best investment banks in the world. And then over the last 10 years, built a small medical physics business into the largest medical physics company in America. Um,
How
I
did that
couldn't,
start, the medical physics piece?
that started, so like I said, went to Emory, went to law school, worked at the law firms, worked at Goldman Sachs. Michael was an entrepreneur. He had a custom tailoring business, and one of his clients was a search fund entrepreneur. So that person went out and found a company to buy, raised some capital, bought the business, and was successful. I think he bought a stair company. And so he introduced this concept of a search fund right around 2008 when Michael's business was closing because of the great financial crisis. And he shared it with me, and I was like, this is something we should file away, and we should really consider doing this because Michael and I have a really complementary skill set. And so fast forward that, I'm still working at Goldman, having a really good career in compliance. Michael's at the University of Chicago, and they're really starting to talk about ETA, and he was one of the leaders there in getting ETA as a real path at Booth. And he was like, I think I want to do this search fund thing, so I'm not going to recruit for private equity and banking. And I was like, look, don't leave me behind. I had gotten my first big bonus ever at Goldman. And I was like, I don't think I can get two of these. Like, I can get one and walk away. So one hit wonder. But if I get two of these, like those handcuffs will go from being open to like fully closed, the golden handcuffs. And so we were in a hotel in Chicago when he was in school. We had a glass of wine and we said we were committed to buying this business. So we raised a search fund in 2013. We started in July of 2013, and by April of 2014, we had bought Kruger Gilbert Health Physics, that medical physics business in Maryland, and we were off to the races.
What were some of the things you did to help grow that, right? I mean, because it's still, I mean, successful at the time, but you really, 100 times it or whatever, right? So what were some of the things you did to make it so big over time?
Yeah, I think we did a lot of things to grow it, but the first thing I'd say, and the most important thing we did, and one of our board members, uh, Rich Augustin, was really adamant that we get a basically an HR assessment. So there was this company called Right Management, and they came in, they interviewed all the employees, they found what was working well, what wasn't working well, and they got a list of suggestions for us to follow. And they essentially handed us a 40-page report of mostly what was wrong with the business, if you can imagine. So it's like, these are 2 pages of really great stuff about the business and the people and the clients, and it was 38 pages of stuff that we needed to fix in the business. And it really gave us great insight into sort of what we had stepped into. And it also gave us a roadmap. And so the first thing we did is we just meticulously, over 5 years, it took us 5 years, but everything in the report we addressed. So the 401k, the IT, the sharing of equipment, pay raises, how we structure who went to what client, paying for support for conferences, our knowledge, we improved our knowledge of the business. And so the first and most important thing from my perspective, if you think about it like building a house, is you have to have a good foundation. And that really comes from building a relationship with the people that are generating your revenue, that are generating your returns, and showing that you care about those people. And in turn, you get that surplus, right? There's always sort of the minimum level that any employee does to make sure they don't get fired, right? But there's an excess, there's more that they can give you if they feel like you care about them, you respect them, you're going to give them growth opportunities, and they get to take some pride in what's being built. And so I think the good thing that we did was by building that foundation, when it was time for, Michael was, largely in charge of growth, whether it was selling, new clients or, finding the next business that we wanted to buy, people were much more receptive to sort of taking on all the work that came with that because we had really laid down that foundation of you told us what needs to be addressed. We gave you a voice and we heard you and we addressed it. Now, did we change everything to their benefit? Not necessarily, but everything in there was fully addressed and acknowledged and worked on in some way. In a lot of cases, we flipped it to them and said, all right, you think the 401k sucks, so who's on the 401k committee to find a new one? And I think that was the first thing, but largely our business grew through acquisition. So we learned how to run the day-to-day business really well. We learned how to grow organically. We learned how to start, raising prices where we needed to. We learned how to hire physicists really well. We learned how to build a culture. We used EOS or Traction to build that business. So we started that in 2017. So we really built, KGHP is that really good, what we would call a platform to go out and acquire businesses. And what we did ultimately is we acquired these businesses and, throughout time, tried to come up with, a best practice for how those practices should be run. And, you said 15 in the intro, they've since done more. So I think we're approaching, over 20 acquisitions that have gone into building One Physics. But the business is now the largest player in the physics space, has a great management team that's been pulled from, really great companies, GE Healthcare, et cetera, and is really poised to be a leader in the space for a long time, which is a far cry again from that 16-person company up in Jarrettsville. So really proud of what the team has done. Obviously, Michael and I had the idea, it was our vision, but there are a lot of people, our investors on both ends, all of our employees, our customers that allowed us to get to that place.
No, I love how you started with that foundation. Obviously, the board member talked about the HR assessment because I feel like when I talk to people, they're really focused on marketing and sales and growth. And it looked like you kind of looked at the foundational piece, which was the staff to build on first before you kind of poured fuel on it. So it was an interesting, I wasn't expecting you to say that.
We were at a conference together and Dan Sullivan, was at that conference and Who Not How is a book that I really resonate with. And I didn't even know, I don't think he wrote it at the time, but like this concept that I wasn't going to, I don't have a master's or PhD in physics, so I can't go do the actual work that my physicists were doing. And, I wasn't doing the contracts, I wasn't doing the billing. And so all of these things in business have to be executed through other people if you want to scale and grow. And so that is the challenge. And I think all entrepreneurs that want to scale their business, it's the hardest thing for them to embrace is the fact that scaling requires less tactics and more finding the right who's to put in position. And I think that separates the people who basically have a job from the people who have built businesses, and then from the people that have built businesses to the people that have built empires, right? Is the level to which you've embraced this concept that you're not the person that's going to make the business go. There are going to be other people. And, I'm a part of a coaching program, and Dan Martell, he always talks about, and I really love it, is you have to have a vision big enough for your employees to fit their dreams in your dream.
That's great.
It's the most powerful thing I've ever heard. And it's what inspires me with Lullwater. It's what inspires Michael, is that we're constantly sort of pushing how big can our vision be so that all of our employees' visions can fit inside of that and have space to grow within that.
I love that. Um, so we talked about the foundation, right? I'd love to hear as you added add-ons and made acquisitions under One Physics, what were some of the learnings there? And before you talk about that, Keith, when you talk about, I don't know, I think in movies for some reason. So when you're talking about, some staff they'll do the minimum, right? But in the right environment, right company, they will just give everything they have, right? And I think of this, I don't know if you've seen this clip before. It's the death crawl scene from Facing the Giants. I don't know. I'm a sucker for a sappy, feel good football movie. So I encourage you to check this out. I won't even give it away, but watch it. And it's where you put, they're putting someone on their back and seeing like how far can they push themselves, right? And it makes me think of that staff who you were talking about doing the bare minimum versus like everything they got. So this scene in this is what I visualize with that. So I won't play it here, but if anyone wants to check it out, just go to YouTube and put in death crawl scene from Facing the Giants.
Yeah.
So talk about learnings from add-ons.
Yeah. The first thing I would say there's a couple things. The first thing is never promise that nothing will change. Now, I would argue, and Michael would argue, that we never told people that things wouldn't change, but there are there are contrary views out of the almost 20 acquisitions that we've done that sometimes we might have said, we're going to keep things the same, they won't change. That is just not factually true. If you're bringing two organizations together, even two well-running organizations together, you're going to have to make choices and value judgments about how are we going to do HR? How are we going to do marketing? How are we going to staff these companies? Do we want to leave them to operate under their separate brands? Do we want to create one brand? And in most cases, sort of the loose, decentralized holding company, particularly if you're in an industry where all the companies do the same thing, is a really tough thing to do. I don't know if you have a software background, but there's this concept of technical debt. And the longer you leave old code in and you don't update it and change it, that debt sort of follows you and eventually it catches up with you. There's what I call integration debt. And when you are buying add-ons in a business, if you don't address those issues up front, how you're going to treat HR, how you're going to do your finance, how you're going to do your sales and marketing, how are you actually going to do the operations of the business, how are you going to layer management over it? Every time you do that, you're going to incur some integration debt and it doesn't go away. And in some respects, as you're scaling and growing, it collects interest, right? And it compounds interest. And so you got to pay even more back later on. And so I'd say never just tell people things are going to change because they will. And they will anchor to you telling them that, and it will make it harder for you to make the changes when you need to. The second point, again, I went a little ahead, but that you do incur integration debt if you don't have a focused strategy on how you're going to pull two disparate, 5 disparate, 10 disparate companies together. And being more thoughtful up front about that and going slow to go fast is a phrase I've heard a lot from my mentors. Going slow to go fast when you have a programmatic acquisition strategy, I think makes a lot of sense. It allows you to do that. And then the third thing is, from my perspective, you have to respect the culture of the businesses that you're buying and look to not kill the things that make those companies great. There's a tendency, obviously I talked about the integration debt, and if you're thoughtful about it, in a lot of cases, by the time you've done this for a while, you can say, this is how we do all these things. The other flip side of that is you still want to leave some ability to understand, and this comes in with listening to people and asking the right questions. What is the secret sauce of this business? What about the culture draws these people here? And making sure, to the extent you can, you don't actually kill what makes those companies special. And I think we probably made all three of those mistakes um, throughout our time period at One Physics. And I don't know what they're doing sort of day to day. But those are common mistakes. I think anybody that is acquiring businesses that they make. Um, but business is messy. I think thinking that it's ever going to get to a nice, wrapped, beautiful, Tiffany box type package is just unrealistic.
No, that's another great question to think about, which is what made those companies great. And, from an integration, it seems like a lot of lessons are with really integration pieces in bringing the companies together in a harmonious fashion to on both ends, right? To not kill what's great in this company and affect the greatness of the company that you're currently running. I'm curious, it makes me think, Keith, why services-based companies? Because I mean, you could go after software company. I mean, there's a lot of different
Yeah.
companies. So talk about why that. When you're talking, I'm like, oh, he should, they could probably acquire software companies, right?
And we may. I think services, if I take you back to 2014 when we first bought the business, Michael and I had never run a business in our lives, right? So services businesses, right? We had a recurring revenue, over 80% of our revenue was recurring. We had really low churn of clients. There were industry tailwinds that were supporting, industry growth. We didn't have high customer concentration. So it was an easy business for two jokers who had never run a business to run. And so that's why we like services then. And frankly, it's still why we like services now. Our perspective is business is hard enough. So if you're going to search for one, try to find one that's going to be easier rather than harder. Some people may disagree, and I think Michael and I now have the ability, I think, to open the aperture. We probably could look at software, and we may end up, buying a software business at some point, because we have more tools and more confidence in our ability to recognize the things that we know and what we don't know, and then find the right who's that could support us. Like I'm a lawyer by background. I have no coding experience whatsoever, but I also didn't have a PhD in physics, and I figured that one out, right? So have the confidence to figure out, and I think we're more apt to do that now. But when people are beginning, I think it's really important to focus on those industry and business characteristics. It's a thing I teach in my class. We teach them about how to think through a scorecard and what an ideal business looks like. And we teach case studies in those classes where, we teach some cases where it's really clear that that was going to be an amazing business in hindsight. And then we teach some cases where, you know, it could have gone really well, but in actuality, in hindsight, you look at it, you're like, yeah, there were some red flags with that business and that industry, and maybe they should think a little differently. And it also really just, there's a little bit of luck involved in all of this stuff and from an entrepreneurial perspective in buying businesses, but all else equal, we like services because they're simpler businesses. And so if you're really good at operating a business, then hopefully, you can just build it that much more. But that's the reason why.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about that with the red flags and when things don't go well, because it kind of combines two things you were talking about so far, which is church and tailwinds. Okay. So we'll talk about the brass company. But before we get into that, just talk about the teaching that you're doing. Where are you doing it? What are you teaching?
Yeah. So Michael and I had a couple of investors and sort of colleagues in the ETA space write a case study on Kruger Gilbert and the business that we bought. And so probably from 2020 to 2024, every year, couple times a year, we would go to the University of Chicago or we would go to Yale and teach these cases on our particular case as guest speakers. And we got great feedback from the students. And then we would leave every time like, oh man, that was awesome. Like
You're
this is
energized.
really, yeah, we were energized. And so
Are these
Uh,
typically MBA students
these
then?
are typically
Yeah.
MBA students, correct? So we were in the MBA program, full-time MBA program classes, and so Michael went to the University of Chicago booth, and the professors there, shout out to Mark Agnew and Brian O'Connor, um, built a great ETA program. They had taught classes there for 8, 9 years, and they wanted to, one, get a little bit of a break of teaching multiple semesters, but they were also building a ETA fellow program at Booth. And they asked Michael and I to join the faculty as an adjunct professor to teach a quarter of entrepreneurship through acquisition. And so we
Yeah.
accepted. We taught
And
this
ETA
fall.
for anyone listening is entrepreneurship through acquisition, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And so we taught for the first time in the fall. I was scared as heck to do it for the first time, even though I know a lot about the industry. I've been in the industry, 12 years. There's just always a nervousness when you're sort of on stage and in front of really smart students, and you want to make sure you're prepared, you don't let them down. I had a blast. There's some of the smartest, students ever. The energy level was high. They were asking really amazing questions. It was just one of the best things I've ever done in my career. And so um, it reinforces, again, just to be young and have that energy is so exciting. And to look at the world and the opportunities of ETA or the many other things that they could do is really exciting. But it also reinforces the lessons that we teach around why do you want to do search? What are good criteria for a company? Understanding the success and failure rates in search, which I think are really important, and just taking them through the life cycle. It also, being a really great teacher helps you learn those concepts in a really strong way because you have to convey them to other people. So it's really been a really great refresher for us to be able to understand that and to give back to those students.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of the red flags we're looking here. This is the University of Chicago. Do all the business schools have like a entrepreneurship through acquisition program, or is that not all of them, or
Not all of them. I think
no?
a lot of the top, MBA programs have them. And this is really, I mean, I think Michael and I, the year we went out, there may have been like 20 or 30 searches that were raised, maybe. And now there's, well over 100, 150. So
You need to be on their podcast, Keith. I
I,
don't know. Have you
I,
been on it?
I just recorded an
Okay, I was gonna
episode
say I'm
that
gonna
I will.
email them today after this, if that's the case. The ETA Insider podcast, and like you said, Brian
I,
O'Connor is right here, so I'm glad because they were. I was gonna have to stalk them to get you on.
I will have an episode dropping, I would say in the next 2 weeks. It's already been recorded. So yeah, they got me on there. So I'm
Cool.
on the circuit, so to speak. I
That's
appreciate
good.
you being an advocate.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's good.
Um, but yeah, it's a great program. I mean, they're doing an amazing job at Polsky, with, Brian and Mark and the rest of the team over there. They're amazing. So I love being a part of the faculty.
Talk about red flags. We can get into specifics, with the brass company, but just in general, you mentioned some some companies when you're looking at the kind of the case studies,
Yeah.
um, there were red flags.
Yeah, so what you're referring to is, we teach, there's a number of cases where there are different red flags that, we want the students to look at and evaluate. In this one case, there's a really strong CEO, has worked in, major industrial companies, Six Sigma background, really smart, really talented, finds a business, making different types of brass products for the altar of churches. Um, and, churches tend to buy these things on a regular cadence and cycle. Obviously, churches have endured as clients for millennia. And so the thought process was that, churches have endured for a millennia. They should go for another millennia, and they should continue to buy, these brass things. And so, he bought the business. There were a number of, regulatory issues. There was actual fire. But the most important thing that happened was there were demographic changes. One, it was around the great financial crisis, so there were changes in just general spending at churches, right? When people's pocketbooks are a little lighter, they spend less in churches. And then there was also a demographic shift that people start going to church less. And so they go to church less, they put less in the altar plate, the money plate. And so,
And also,
churches.
even with like COVID and everything, I mean, there's virtual, right? So like maybe
Correct.
there's more, there may be like same membership, but they're not necessarily going in either.
Correct. So you take all those things into account, and the business was challenged to perform. They ran it for a long time, admirably, got investors, some of their money or most of the money back, but it wasn't the home run, so to speak, of investment opportunities. And when you look at it in hindsight, you see a business that was more of a manufacturing, type business versus a recurring revenue service business. They had inventory, they had to sell through distributors or catalogs and things like that. Um, they had a small TAM, total addressable market, so they're selling to, churches in the US. It's not as big as if they were, you know, real estate, healthcare, some of the bigger marketplaces. And so those are some of the red flags. Like in search in general and ETA, you're not necessarily targeting the biggest TAM in the world, but you do want to have some size. A TAM can be too small even for a search fund company, and it doesn't give you enough runway to grow. Not finding a recurring revenue business is a big one. And one of my great investors, Will Thorndike, the first time I met him, he asked Michael and I, like, why do you want to buy a recurring revenue business? And we gave him some answers. I think they were smart, but they weren't the right ones. And he was like, it's because it buys you time. If you don't have to think about going out and generating that next dollar of revenue tomorrow, because that client comes back year after year and they're under contract and they pay you every month, like that gives you time to learn how to be a CEO and learn how to run that business. And a lot of people buy these, project-based businesses or these manufacturing businesses, distribution businesses where there isn't, steady recurring revenue, and it causes a lot of stress if there's a downturn in the marketplace. Um, Sellers can be a red flag. So if you have a seller that throughout the buying process is not trustworthy, says one thing, but the books show another thing, those can be big red flags as well. But an ideal case, you want a recurring revenue business with high cash flow, EBITDA to free cash flow conversion with some industry tailwinds for growth, low customer concentration. So the opposite of that, you got businesses with high customer concentration. You have a really slow or no growth industry. It's not recurring revenue, and you have a lot of your capital tied up in CapEx and other things to sort of continue maintenance of the business. Those are businesses that can work, but they require a higher level of operational excellence in order to make it work.
Yeah, you're like business is tough enough. Let's just make it as easy as humanly
That's a
possible,
general
all that
theme.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to walk away, from a deal at the end of last year, and great business from my perspective. Um, but one of my investors asked me if you were a first time entrepreneur, and or there was a first time entrepreneur and they were going to buy this business and they asked you what should they do, what would you tell them? And I was like, I probably would tell them not to buy it. But I'm me, right? So like I think I'll be great. But the bottom line is like business is
Right.
hard enough. And
Yeah.
so the easier you can make it on yourself, the better. And you just need one success. And so it's better to stack the deck in your favor by picking a simple business model, a simple business with the attributes that, we talked about without the red flags. And that's going to give you a better likelihood of success in a pretty hard thing that not everybody's going to be successful in.
Keith, first of all, I have one last question, but thank you. This has been really instructive. I have to re-listen to this because there's a lot of points in here that I just need to sink in further. Um, Last question is, your mom really instilled education in you. So I'd love to hear some of your favorite books, in business. You mentioned the Dan Sullivan books, Who
Mhm.
Not How. Any other books that you recommend or that you like that people should check out?
Yes. So I would say the most inspirational book for me was Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? It was a biography of Reginald Lewis. So he was the first, black entrepreneur to buy $1 billion company. He was a lawyer like me, actually from Baltimore, where I'm living now. So a lot of congruence there. But I read that book as a young person and really thought it was possible. I love Who Not How. I love The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Again, business is hard enough, and I think he does a really good job of telling you how hard business is. Um, I also I like Shoe Dog a lot as well.
I love that book.
Um,
I feel like it's entrepreneurial therapy.
it really is because Phil Knight went through some stuff, and I think uh, a lot of what we deal with day to day in entrepreneurship is just persistence and being able to sort of wade through the muck. So those, I mean, I have a longer list, but those are some of the good ones. And then one that's more philosophical is Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning.
One of my
That one sort of
favorites.
rounds it
Yeah,
out and puts it all this stuff that we're doing in perspective. So those are just a couple that spring to mind.
I love it. I'm gonna have to check out. I love the title. Why should white guys have all the fun? I'm gonna have to check this book out. Hopefully, it's on Audible because yeah, I think it is on Audible. I'm gonna
Yeah,
buy it after we get off and listen to it. This
yeah,
is
I love it.
fantastic.
Yeah, he has a great arc and a great story. And it was really inspiring for me.
Keith, I want to be the first one to just say thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey, your stories. Everyone can check out lullwaterco.com to learn more. If you know what he's talking about, if you know of a business that seems interesting, message them. And he talked kind of about the criteria, what they're looking for. And Keith, I just want to thank you so much, and we'll see everyone next time.
All right, thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it, man.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I feel like 100 grand.